Hello, everyone. I'm David Easthope from Coalition Greenwich, and I'm here with Matt Nurse, Commercial Product Director at SIX. Matt, we were very happy to collaborate with you on the latest installment of our annual research study, which we believe is the definitive guide on market data decisions and the use of technology. As you know, this year's title was Advanced Technology Use Gives Market Data a Boost. We saw a strong focus on the types and frequencies of data used, along with emerging technologies and their deployment. Matt, what stood out for you in this year's study?
Thanks, David. Good to speak to you again. SIX had the pleasure of working with you again this year, and it's always interesting to read over ground again and really understand what the pulse of the market data industry is thinking. What stood out, firstly, is many of the things that came up in the first report were validated again, specifically the core requirements. So really, data is all about the quality, the reliability, and then the cost. Even though the market talks a lot about cost, it really has to be good if you're going to buy it. There continues to be the spend trend where most of the businesses anticipate that they will be spending more next year, moderately more. And an interesting thing that came out this time was there was a much higher degree of localized decision making. And what that normally says to me is, we're in quite a good part of the market segment when local teams are able to make local decisions on how they acquire and use data. Last year, we talked a lot about real time. If you think about the world and how we're shifting and expecting things to be done now, if we came together talking many years ago, trading would probably be one of the only parts of that workflow that would be looking specifically here. Now you have things like risk, compliance, the digital applications in that landscape. Think about client applications. Most people now want data intraday. And obviously, we look at websites constantly, and if data doesn't move, it's probably not quick enough. So there's a real push, and SIX sees a real push for people demanding real time. I think the final thing that came up, again, wasn't really that evident last year, was in the area of tick data. So obviously, from a regulatory and risk perspective, areas like market abuse, arrival price, things like this are actually creating more and more demand for tick data sets. And if you then start thinking about, one of the key topics this year, advanced technologies, there's also a lot of people looking at, the use of tick in back testing, modeling, and in these new technologies. So again, these are data sets that have typically been, more expensive to acquire, more difficult to store because they're really heavy in volume, but there's a lot of demand for that. So quite a lot of validating what we heard last year, but also quite a lot of new things as well.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear that. And there were some really good points in there. In particular, when you mentioned that interrelationship between data and these advanced technologies that you mentioned, I found that part fascinating. So what do you think the market is saying here?
Well, I think you can't look at data in isolation anymore. And the technology which ultimately supports that, and by that I mean the deliveries, the storage, these types of areas are critical. For example, it's widely reported now that, there's a huge shift in the industry towards APIs. Having the right delivery mechanism to get your data is just as important as the data itself. You can have great quality data, but if delivery is either slow, unreliable, then obviously you're going to have a problem. Interestingly, in the report, obviously, there's the continuation of the theme around cloud. And interestingly, a lot of things about public cloud. In the specific questions in the report, which looked at whether people considered these use cases with cloud good value, there was actually a bit of a split. Interestingly, there's obviously some people who've got it right and are really managing to adapt and use cloud profitably. And potentially there's other people, depending on the use case, that don't quite see that yet. So that was an interesting part. I can't avoid AI. I mean, it's the headline item this year, so much so, and the speed of it, shows that we didn't even include it in the report last year. But obviously, many people ask us, many people are engaging in that area. Obviously, there's a lot of sandbox and experimental activity going on within the markets. The report asked people where they're using this. A lot of internal use at the moment, a lot of use for efficiency. And secondly, a lot of use around informing better human decision making. So not necessarily automating an entire process, but getting better information in the hands of people who then make decisions. So I think this is quite a positive trend. And clearly there's a lot still to learn in that area.
Quite a lot to learn. I think it's all really fascinating with everything you mentioned with cloud, APIs, generative AI, all really fascinating. There's obviously a huge report behind all of this, but for those who are looking for a summary of the brief takeaways, what would you say those are?
Well, look, I mean, again, I said before, you can't just look at data on the basis of how much content you've got. Quality is nuanced. It really depends what your use case is. And when it comes to the technology, you have to get the deliveries, the capacity, the connectivity, and then look at what type of data is needed in what particular systems. This is obviously making it two things, slightly more complicated for the industry to really understand how to use data properly, and also managing costs. If you think about acquiring data now, you have licensing costs, delivery costs, storage costs. If you look at the whole total cost of ownership of that chain, you really have to look at this now on a deeper level to make sure that your acquisition of data and the cost of that matches the output, what you're getting from the data you're actually receiving. So it's fascinating, but the good news is we see the industry growing and there's a huge appetite for looking at better ways to use data going forward. These advanced technologies as well are really making people think about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for those who want to learn more, to hear more, what should they do?
Absolutely. Well, the best thing to do is to visit the SIX website where this report is available. Download it there, have a read. And of course, if there are elements of that in which you'd like to ask more questions or more information, obviously you can get through to me or the team, and we'd be happy to kind of follow up with you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.